What's up, people? Welcome back to another episode of Kickoff Sessions. On this week's episode, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to do a little Q&A because I feel like over the last couple of months, I've been pushing so hard to come out with new episode guests, which is great. It's always good to connect to new people and grow the actual channel. But I want to give a bit of an insight into, some questions about me, something kind of chill, something more relaxed. And this is going to be just kind of like a ad hoc podcast. So I put up a Q&A on my Instagram yesterday. And I'm just going to bang through some of the questions. A lot of them are going to be around just kind of advice that I've had, even going from my own job to building my podcast, building my agency, and a few other shit. I haven't really gone through them, so we're going to get into some of the details. So first question is, what advice would you have for going from a professional six-figure job to taking the leap? So basically, some of the background from my story, right, is that my background was in fintech, which is like financial technology, which is another fancy way to say finance. And I put so much time into growing my own career, which is why I had a careers podcast. Kickoff Sessions started off as a careers podcast before the online business space, right? And the biggest thing for me was the fact that I felt like I had invested so much time and money into my career that it was so difficult to leave to some degree. And even though I had a podcast and I had a platform and I did a couple of like random entrepreneurial stuff when I was younger, I was like doing some e-commerce stuff, I was doing some coaching, I was doing some mentoring, I was doing a few other kind of bullshit time wasters, that I felt like there was no right time to leave. So the only reason why I was able to do it was that I built leverage on the side. And leverage can be multidimensional. It can be your podcast, it can be your brand, it can be actual wealth that you build. But you want to build yourself enough oxygen, and oxygen is, again, multifactorial. It can be whatever it is, so that you can eventually leave and either figure out what you want to do or build what you want to do. Now, I actually took Justin Welch's exact approach, which is you want to build up your side hustles to 60% of the value of your 9 to 5. So I was making roughly around $100,000 from my $9 to $5, and that was around $8,000 per month. I would need to get to around 5K in that. And some months I was there, some months I was not there. And what I was doing was effectively building my agency, which is my podcast agency, Voics now. And how I was doing it was I was trying to get clients, I was trying to do ad hoc work. But you're just trying to give yourself enough confidence that you know, okay, I'm committing 20 hours a week and I can get to this stage. And at that point, then you're ready to actually take the leap. Because I think today you can definitely balance it. You can definitely get to a certain stage whereby you don't need to pull down your fucking pants and do it all in one go. You can definitely toe the line and do kind of both at some point. And at that point, then get ready to move over. So for me, when you do leave, and when I did leave, how I think about it is that when you're doing like these side hustles on top of all the other shit you do, like your 9 to 5, it's like, yeah, this is great. Like I'm making extra $1,000 a month. I'm paying my rent, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But when you fundamentally leave, the pressure increases by 100x, because now you know that you're not going to get like a stable income, and there's nothing quite stable in life, but you're not going to get a consistent income. So you need to be able to actually commit fully to it. So for me, like the pressure over the last couple of months has obviously been like exceptionally high. Working with a lot of people has been very, very high, very stressful on my body, very stressful on my mind. But I think it's given myself that confidence that I am able to go and do more personal things. And I think James Smith said this, was that if you're good at something you hate, you're going to be great at something you love. I think it was James Smith. And I kind of always kept that in the forefront of my mind, because obviously what I'm trying to achieve is quite unique to some degree. It's not just like an everyday kind of like business. And that's been very important. Someone said, what were you doing for work when you started the pod, and how do you balance your time? Good question. So when I first started off my podcast, or why I started, it was very interesting, right? Because I was working in consulting at the time, like technology consulting, grad program, the general kind of stuff. But before that, I was actually working in a startup in Cork, where I'm originally from, and I fucking loved it. There was a small team, around 8 of us. We were in this tiny office in this small part of Ireland, and I really, really loved it. And I got an offer from a very big consulting firm to move. And they gave us, it was a decent offer or whatever, and they said, you come in as a graduate, you move very, very quickly. And in the first year when I moved, I realized that I was the exact same as everyone else. Now, I do not put myself on a pedestal in any regard or anything like that. But from an input perspective, I was doing a shit ton of work. I was doing a shit ton of value. I was managing like a $1 million contract on my own, bear in mind, because of lockdown. They had to change like allocation of resources. And at the end of that year, I only got like a tiny bump in salary and a tiny increase in promotion. And I thought in my head, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, I do all this work, but I'm not getting the return from it. And that's when I was like, all right, it's time to build something on the side. And when I decided to do something, I remember it was during lockdown. I was not like lonely, but I obviously didn't have like many friends around, whatever. So I wanted to do something that was social, something that would build my career, build my credibility, and it was quite social. And a podcast is the perfect balance between that, because I didn't have much experience, but I could play the student. And to this day, I still play the student quite a lot. And what I was able to do was interview people that were very senior in their career, either founders, executives, entrepreneurs, and just ask them advice. How would I change this? How would I move career? How would I do this? How would I do this? And it opened up so many doors because it just changed my perspective. I was always around 23, 24-year-olds who were just focused on, not even focused on just going out, but they weren't really focused on thinking super big. Like, I'm thinking like, how do you make like fucking 20 or 30K in a month from your 9 to 5? And that's the way I was thinking initially. I was like, this surely is possible, which I then learned it wasn't exactly that possible unless you're in something like sales. So then at that point anyway, I was putting all this time into my podcast. It was making zero money, literally $0. But I was putting all this invested time, which was very helpful because I was able to build up a lot of credibility, a lot of reputation. People like, know, and trust me. And how I balanced it, to the question, was that I would do all my scheduling at super early hours. So I'm quite an early bird to begin with, but my 9 to 5 would literally start at 9. I would get up at 6, schedule out all my posts, do all my blog posts, do all my podcasts, do all my clips. At the time, it was quite just an audio podcast. And then in the evenings, I would record with people who were based in the US. So when I was based in Ireland, it was like plus 6 hours from US or 8 hours from West Coast. And I would just do all my recording quite late. So that's like 8, 9, 10. And yeah, I was able to squeeze out about 4 hours, I would say, each day. And to be honest, when you're consistent and when it was lockdown, you had no other option. Like, I had fucking nothing else to do. That level of discipline and consistency it just compounds. And at that point, very basic podcast, very basic model, not much involved with it. Even the guests that I had, to be honest, like, were people that anyone can kind of speak to, you know, and obviously I don't mean that in a negative way, just the fact that you can reach out to them today and get a conversation, get on a call with them, very nice and open people. And that's the beauty of doing it. So over time, then you start allocating more time. And when you get that feedback loop, a positive feedback loop that, okay, this is working, things are clicking. And at that point, I was literally getting 30 downloads per episode, literally 30. In the beginning, it spiked and then it goes leveled out. And like, there's nothing wrong with that because you're learning the skill. Even to this day, I'm only writing a newsletter the past 3 months. And now I know that every Sunday my newsletter will go out because of the fact that I've built up these literally 3 years of consistent reps every day, just beating the same drum, consistently working towards a new goal, that becomes hugely valuable. So I spoke about this on a podcast yesterday that when I go to do something new now, even though there's a big knowledge gap and there's a big thing that I need to learn from that perspective, I'm never from a perspective of, I don't have the consistency, I won't have this discipline, because you get that from reputation and you get that from repetition, and you get it from consistency. So that's exactly where I'm getting it from. That's exactly where I focus from. So as a result, I was able to scale that quite significantly. All right. So the next question is, how and where have you met your girlfriend? So this little girl is actually sitting right across from me at the moment with her face getting very pissed off. But anyway, so me and Elise met about 4 years ago now at this stage. Actually a pretty cool story. So I just came back from traveling. I just finished my university and, you know, everyone goes traveling, whatever, and then you go back to your 9 to 5 and that's life and life is over, life is boring. Fuck that. Basically came back, I was based in Dublin. And I was like all good relationships, I was on Tinder, which actually wasn't called Tinder, it was called Hinge. And Elise was actually solo traveling at the time, which is pretty sick. So I like met her because she was traveling, I had been traveling, so we already had that like commonality between each other, which was really cool. Then we met up, got together, all good stuff, whatever. And then from there, she was traveling consistently. And we would just meet in like random places across Europe. It'd be really cool and just do a lot of fun stuff. And then at that point, then we were like, fuck it, we'll go to Thailand and travel Thailand for a bit. The day I was in the airport, the exact day I was in Dublin airport is when lockdown happened. I think it was like the 13th of March, a little after my birthday. And the whole world like was shut down. Everyone was like, go inside your house, batten down your hatches, everyone take fucking everything. And I just left for Thailand at that point. And basically, we spent a lot of weeks in Thailand together, and then we flew back to Europe. I won't name the airport, but we got stuck in quarantine for several days. And I think at that point, then we obviously knew that like there was a good like relationship. So we have like obviously the personal side of things, but then more of I think there's a difference of opinion for a lot of stuff, but then there's a lot of commonalities. And it's not just like travel and the bougie shit of life. It's a lot of good like values. And then from there, then we were able to kind of like, we were spending a lot of time in Mexico together, obviously in Bali, and then we kind of moved out here full time. So I think that's really valuable that when you have like a partner who's very different than you. So I would be very, very type A, very like goal oriented, driven, fucking alpha bra to some degree. And then Elise would be very like calm and relaxed and caring, compassionate, which is very like different to my personality. But then the intersection between the two is like obviously travel, health, like dogs that we like fucking, we always like rescuing dogs and shit like that. So I think that's very important in a partner, and which is why we've been together for like nearly 4 years, I guess, at this stage. And it's been through that kind of transition. And Sterling Cooper, when he was on my podcast, he made a really good point about this. He was like, if you're a man who's trying to do really ambitious shit, which is what we should all be doing, really focusing on it, you need to find a partner who's there with the journey. And the best part to like literally find a partner is at the beginning of your journey. So really, like I met Elise before I started a podcast, which is when I was in peak fucking depression mode. Now I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I had a feeling of depression for sure, from my 9 to 5. And from there, she was the one that recommended me to start a podcast. She was like, look, you have a lot of valuable shit to share with people. And then from there, then everything that I've pursued, she's been behind. And it's never been like a trade-off. And we've kind of worked like in a symbiotic way. And it works both ways, should I say. Like I've helped her with her ventures and her ideas and her thought process. And I think even from my own perspective, it was better to kind of help me, I guess, calm down in some regards. I'm still obviously at 100 miles an hour 24/7. But being able to recognize when I'm a little bit like fucking burnt out has been very helpful. And I know a lot of fucking red pill dudes are going to be like, oh, like don't get a girlfriend in your 20s, focus on yourself. But I guarantee you, if you don't have a partner, you're going to be on Tinder. And if you're not on Tinder, you're going to be in a nightclub. And if you're in a nightclub, you're going to be drinking, doing all sorts. And it's actually going to be kind of detrimental. And now I don't mean that from like a safety perspective, do fuck all with your life. But I just mean that you can satisfy a lot of your desires and a lot of your ambitions by finding the right partner, which is pretty sick. What are my income sources? Good question. So to take a step back on that, I used to always think like, oh, like fucking 8 different income sources are the best way to build wealth and then diversify and transform. But when I met Marcus Hustle, who was on my podcast, he didn't say it to me, but it was as if he was speaking to me. He was like, if you have 4 different things going on and you have 25% of your focus, 25% of your focus, 25% of your focus, 25% of your focus, you basically dilute your focus and dilute the results. So if you're making 2K a month from each one, yeah, you're making 8K, yay, 100K a year. But if you just picked one and scaled the fucking shit out of it, you could actually make way more money. You could get 1 to 30K, hire a team, base a team, and then that team will run the company, and then you can start your second venture. So of course, I fell into the first category. I had stuff for my podcast. I was doing like affiliate marketing for my podcast. I was doing some small sponsorships, which were just pennies at the end of the day. I had my 9 to 5, which was obviously my main source at the time. And then I was trading at the time. I was options trading at the time. Obviously like no investment advice, but like I had a trading coach and everything that I worked really closely with. Then at the time as well, I was doing like mentoring for young professionals. So all of these were just like splitting focus. That's all I thought. When I looked at my schedule every day, it was just like I was a mess. I was like 4 different people on a piece of paper every day. So as a result, I scrapped out all of that, cut everything gone, and I just focus on the agency. And the agency works because when I put more time into the agency, which is growing the podcast agency, which is working with brands, working with entrepreneurs to manage and grow their podcast, when I'm able to do that and when I focus on that, it works because I can figure out the problems we're having in the agency because that's the only thing I focus on. I'm not focusing on the next shiny object. So I believe I can grow the agency quite significantly as a result. And I think that this will be the year where the agency will grow really well. Of course, because I'm putting all my focus into it. And at that point, then I can start thinking of other things. But I do not want to split my focus because it's a waste of time and someone else can possibly do it. Okay, I'm not saying that you can't do it. And if you feel like you should do it, you can do it, right? But me, I don't know, am I fucking a small bit ADHD on the side, but I find very, very difficult to focus on 4 or 5 different things. And when I focus on one thing consistently, it works really well. Now, you might be saying, well, you have a podcast and an agency. The agency supports the podcast supports the agency. So I'll give you an example. One of my main clients, which is Rob Lipset, which a lot of people that listen would probably know, I will never test a new philosophy or design principle on his podcast first. I will test it on my own podcast. I will A/B test it. I'll write a lot of copy. I'll do a lot of different stuff. And at that point then, when I know it's a good idea, I'll run it by him and we'll run it through his podcast. That's how the principles work. And that's why it's really good, because I have skin in the game. I literally have a podcast. I have the experience. I've done the thing. Done it for 3 years. Now I can help other people do it. And there's not enough of that around. And I'm very skeptical of myself sometimes if I don't do this thing really well before I help other people. I don't want to be like a fucking copywriter who's starting a Twitter account at 0 and then helping other people grow their Twitter following. Like, that's not what this is about. I've done the thing. Yeah, I'm not like Chris Williams and Joe Rogan's size yet, but the fact that I'm committing to the process and then I'm able to refine and iterate on it and help other people, that's all that matters, you know. And I don't try, even when I speak to people, I don't pretend like I've all the cheat codes sorted out. I'm absolutely learning this at a very, very incremental stage. And when I look at my stuff from even a month ago, I see such big changes, which is pretty awesome. Why did I leave my job in tech? So, for context, I worked at a financial technology company, which was a very fast growing company, a very big company. It's a big household name at this stage in Europe, especially Western Europe. And the reason why I left it is because I wanted to build for myself. So I invested all this time into, it's called product, the element of it. And the advantages of doing that, I guess, is the fact you learn how to build mobile apps. You learn how to build like really engaging apps and all that kind of good stuff. Now, I had done it for so many years and put a lot of time into it that I felt like towards the end of it, I didn't have much leverage myself. And I noticed that when I left. When I left, I kind of thought like that, okay, on a CV, I have things on the CV, but they don't really have anything. It's not tangible. When I speak to someone who's like even like an entrepreneur or like a founder, it's not like it's like I've rented experience off someone. So I kind of got to the period where I was like, okay, I'm either going to build an app myself, like build a web app or build a mobile app, or build like a SaaS product from here. But obviously, like VC funding is like in the fucking floor at the moment. And I kind of just became a little bit resentful of the process, that I kind of wanted to do something completely different. Obviously a bit adjacent to my own podcast, a bit adjacent to what I had traditionally done. And I did do a bit of a pivot. I was in this product startup world and I pivoted into the service world. And that was a bit scary, of course, but I needed to make that change. And if you're in that period where you feel like you're making a bit of a pivot, you got to ask yourself one thing. And Yusuf Smith said this to me. He was on episode like 104 of Kickoff Sessions, which was, look at your manager. Look at your manager's manager and check, are they fundamentally happy? If they are, you're in the right place, because that's where you're going to be. You're going to be your manager in 4 years. You're going to be your manager's manager in 8 years. And if you think that's the right path, go down that path. If you don't, if you're looking at it and you see people stressed, miserable, resentful, that's when you got to change. Not saying that that's what happened to me, but that's what I had to take in my brain and think like, is this the right path for me? Is this fundamentally what I want for my career, my lifestyle? Let's go make a change. And as a result, you know, like there's no certainty of anything. It's obviously been a big change and a big lifestyle change, and it's kind of a part of my story. But what I think is going to be kind of valuable to people, especially in my own podcast, is the fact that I'm not someone who has no experience in the corporate real life world. I've literally gone and done it. And because of that, I feel like I have like a unique experience as a result, because I've got to a stage whereby I made quite a considerable amount of money from 9 to 5. And then I was able to kind of pivot into my own stuff from it. So I've definitely been on both sides of the fence. And look, I'm not saying everything's perfect. Everyone's circumstances are different. If you have a child, have a wife, have a mortgage, have kids, maybe having your own business, or maybe messing around with some internet money may not be the best thing for you. But at the very least, very least, you can build on the side and try to do something on the side. And by doing something on the side, you can pay your mortgage, pay your kids childcare, you can do different things. And giving myself that perspective really opened up my brain, because I was like, okay, I can do this. I have the confidence, I have the skills. I want to double down and try to really focus on it. Okay. Where are we? Who's a better influence on younger men, Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate? Good question. I would say Jordan Peterson appeals to a particular audience that is more of a professional audience to some degree, because he comes from more of a professional background. You know, he's an academic. He's worked in the space, not an academic, sorry, he's a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. He also is a bit of an academic from the perspective he does a lot of lecturing and things like that as well. So maybe some people might not resonate with him as much, and it's all about like who we find like quite relatable, right? And I really liked Jordan Peterson, especially when I was quite younger. I don't follow him like as much. I don't have that much like mental bandwidth at the moment. But when I was younger, like I really like kind of like fed into his content, especially just the responsibility, taking care of yourself, like actually the realities of the world, and the fact that world is actually not the safest place, or it's not the kindest place, or not the most genuine. Life is tough sometimes, but the solution is not to sit there and give out on fucking Twitter. The solution is to work hard, dedicate yourself to a craft, become like a master of a particular craft, whether it's basket weaving or whether it's sales or whether it's technology. You become a master of it and work very hard in it. But as a result, I think some people don't listen to his advice as much as what Tate does. So Tate obviously has a very careful message, and he's been a big role in my journey. He played a huge role in my journey, and one of the reasons why is because he didn't necessarily like open my eyes up to a whole new different fucking world, but he made me realize that you can get complacent in what you're doing. You can go day to day and essentially waste so many years of your life. You have been, for the most part, sold a lie that working a 9 to 5 or doing the traditional path will make you wealthy, especially from a US perspective. If you've leveraged up to fuck and you've done 200k of debt, and now you're working in downtown New York and you're paying 4k for an apartment and you're paying all this shit, and then you're just waiting until you get like, you know, a mortgage, you are literally going to be broke for a very long time, and your debt stays with you to your grave. What he teaches you is much more on the responsibility side, but also how you can do it yourself. You can really kind of take ownership and do it yourself. And yeah, as a result, he's been a huge part of my journey. Of course, it's part of his message, whatever. But when I spoke to Justin Waller, I was like, of course the dude's selling something. We're all selling shit. If he doesn't sell something, then someone else is going to sell something. It's part of life. It's part of, like, there's nothing wrong with selling something. And yeah, he's been a huge fucking part of my journey. A lot of younger people and all, like, his stuff obviously been taken hugely out of context, which is wildly unfair. And it can happen to anyone as well. Something for some people to realize. But yeah, he's a very positive influence on a lot of men, a lot of young men, and even other guys that are doing things that are similar. Like Iman is doing quite something similar. Even Jack Hopkins is doing something that's quite similar. It's just about, you know, not conforming to a traditional way of thinking. That you can be in Bali like we are today. You can be in Thailand. You can be in Mexico. You can build business. You can do something. You can do audacious things with your life. You can have women, cars, all that good stuff. But you also have to take care of like your family. You have to have the right values, principles. You have to be stoic. You have to be relaxed. You have to be calm. You have to be cool-headed. And yeah, that's very, very valuable. And yeah, someday I'd love to interview Tate. I'd love to meet him. Of course, I've met Justin and Sterling. And I wouldn't want to do it in a clout kind of way. Like, I have a lot of questions that are very on a subconscious level that I feel would be quite unique for Andrew. I feel it would be quite different. I wouldn't be flying to Romania saying how to be a 1% man for sure. Like, that wouldn't be the agenda. The agenda would be to go very much deeper into a psychological side of things for sure, and to understand like his makeup, a lot of his like childhood, like, things like that. I would try to lean into a lot. So yeah, maybe the day will come. One of these days, Andrew, if you're listening, one of these days, brothers. Okay. If you could re-record any early episode with your current skill set, which would it be and why? I think maybe the Daniel Crosby episode. So if anyone doesn't know Daniel Crosby, he's an author, he's a behavioral psychologist, I think so. And he does a lot of like personal finance. A lot of personal finance stuff. And I interviewed him at around episode 50 odd. And I feel like that I was quite immature at the time. Like I feel like every 10 episodes my entire life fucking changes to some degree. But I feel like at the time I wasn't able to move a conversation as well. Like someone who's very intellectual, there's a way to panic a conversation and there's a way to dig into some stuff. For instance, we spoke about like the psychology of money and how that changes people's behavior and how people can like be either greedy or from a position of abundance or a position of, you know, like literally like fear and fear a lot of the time, which a lot of people live in to do with money. And I feel like with now, like kind of where I'm at mentally, I would be able to go a lot deeper into the conversation. I would try to ask a lot of why questions, get into the deeper crevices of his brain. And I'm sure we're going to actually record again in the future sometime. Like I usually wait for a trigger, like whether there's a new book or whatnot. And what I would try to do is just go a little bit deeper and in person. And actually, funny enough, the audio actually cut out halfway through, but he was a G about it. He was like, yeah, no worries. He was very accommodating. But at the very end, the audio actually cut out. But yeah, he's a super interesting dude. But I think there's some people, and my mate Colin pointed this out the other day, that you need to record with in person because you need to analyze their thought process by their visual and how they react personally to stuff. Like you just feel and touch and their kind of vibe. That's a very valuable asset to have when you're interviewing someone, is being able to see how they react and do they move in a certain way, and that lets you go into a very deep conversation and leaves you be like embodied in that conversation, which I think is very, very valuable. So he's a great guest. I don't regret a lot of my earlier conversations because I feel like that's part of the journey. Like it's great to look back on stuff and like cringe. Everyone says if you don't look back in like your previous self and cringe, whatever. But I like it though. Like I like the fact I didn't start video until episode like 40, even though I lost a shitload of yards and I lost so much progress from not doing it. But I feel like though that it was valuable in the long run. It's going to actually help me as a human in the long run. And just small nuances like that have become very valuable. What mistakes did you make at the start of your career which you have learned from? Excellent question. So, I am someone who can be quite impressionable, or I was when I was quite younger. I would follow the path of others to some degree, even though I would consider myself as an independent thinker. And I still, to this day, quite think I'm an independent thinker. I think right now, the way my life is kind of set up, I'm very much on my own a lot of the time, in terms of like, I'm just based in Asia, just living here with my girlfriend, and I interact with other people. But in the earlier stages of my career, I was surrounded by my mates, and I was surrounded by other people's desires and dreams. I moved to bigger companies because family members told me it was a good idea. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but their goals are completely different than yours. It was friends, it was extended friends, it was professors who told me that, it was a good idea to go to these big, safe companies. When in fact, I should have leaned into what I actually was good at, which was working in startups, working with a CEO, being literally next to CEO, and being like, I don't think you should do that, I think you should do it this way. And he's like, why? And I'm like, okay, because of X, Y, and Z. And he's like, okay, let's do that. But when you're at a super big company, you're insulated, and as a result, you have very little flexibility in what you can do. It's very hard to show the creative aspect of you or show like the ultra committed side of you, which is kind of like where I get my energy from. My energy is like adding one bit of energy and getting 2x return, adding another bit of energy and getting 3x return. And when I'm in these super big, slow companies, that doesn't matter. You know, it literally doesn't matter. And your promotion doesn't matter. It's just going to happen, all this kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say I regret it, but it was definitely something, a mistake, that I should have stayed small and stayed very scrappy. Because when I am scrappy is when I have the best thought processes and the best ideas. Even like quite now with our agency, if something goes fucking horrifically wrong, it is back against the wall sometimes, because as the founder, I have to take responsibility. If something goes wrong, we have to fix it. And even though I have a great team, and Zijan, who's going to be editing this video, he's a great editor, we have a great graphic designer, Somu and all the guys, I need to take responsibility. And you don't learn the skill of responsibility and the value of responsibility by being in larger companies. You were insulated to the world, and you were given a worldview that's not necessarily your worldview. So people would tell me that you need to do all this extra fucking work that was to do with like volunteering and stuff, but it would have no impact on me or the people around me or the clients I work for. And as a result, I was like, this is kind of bullshit, to be honest. That's like the long story short. Have you ever fallen out with a guest or have one that you disliked? That's interesting. Never fallen out with a guest, I guess. But we definitely have like a difference of opinions, which is also valuable. You're meant to have people on your podcast that are not exactly aligned to your views and your worldview. You want people that are quite different. Now, one thing that I don't particularly like in the industry of the podcast world is transactional relationships. When I meet someone for an interview, I always say to them, like, I will literally do anything in return for free. Even though if it takes a load of my time and a load of my energy, I'm happy to help you. I'd love to help you. I'd love to be there for you and love to, be a part of like your network and be a part of your system and your worldview. Not in a sneaky way, just more in like I'd love to help you. But sometimes like people will hop on a podcast and they'll just want like a transaction out of it. They just want exposure. They'll get in, get out. They won't share a podcast and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's it's a bit strange because like why would you commit time to a podcast and then just look for like exposure but then not want to promote the work? It's just it's quite rare and it's quite strange that happens as well. But I just try to as much limit that as much as possible. So you'll often find that I only kind of interview guests that we're all part of the same mission, right? We're probably in a similar vertical. We work in the social media space. We're trying to grow platforms. We're trying to work together. And I think, I can only speak for men, but like men working together is really fucking powerful too. Even when I'm like working with, for instance, like Jack Hopkins at the moment, when we're behind each other and we're both like sharing the mission of like growing his brand, growing my brand, growing the podcast. It's just sick, and it's really engaging. And even with my clients, when we work together, it's like really nice, and I feed off that energy. Like I love that energy. So I don't really like when things are transactional. Same with like when people like when I meet up with people for like a networking event or when I go to like a coffee with someone. If someone's looking for just like pure something from me, whether it's like knowledge, experience, investment from me, I'm just kind of like a little bit. I get the ick a small bit because I'm kind of like, it's like a byproduct. And I'll give you an example. Like I would consider me and Rob to be like genuine friends, and we get on really well. We ask each other like the proper questions, and we actually like we care for like how each other's like business work and doing. But we also work together in a professional sense, and that is such a nice little balance because like I'm very interested in what he does. He's quite interested in what I do, and we always kind of just like chat. We have a good little balance. That's great. I work with many of my previous guests in different capacities, and we are in the same kind of value-driven capacity, which is awesome, right? So I think that's what you should kind of, encourage to push towards is, yeah, we want to grow and we want to increase our revenue and save our time and all this kind of stuff. But fundamentally, what you want to do as well is you want to help people, right? So if someone is trying to offer your experience to you and you're trying to offer your experience to them, just be helpful. Don't be a dickhead. It's a small world. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone links back to everyone, in some capacity. And that's all that kind of matters. Okay, so I got a couple of questions around this. What was the biggest step in turning pro with the podcast? So I haven't actually read the book, like Turning Pro, but I know it's a very important book. And I know that Chris Williamson always references it for his podcast. For me, I wouldn't necessarily say that like I'm like pro at this stage because one, I don't take external investment for the podcast at the moment unless I find the right sponsor, which is very difficult to do. And secondly, I'm not at the same stage. So I'm not trying to pretend like I'm anybody. I have on average 150,000 views per month, which is average in the grand scheme of things. I have a couple of thousand downloads a month because downloads are not as significant as views. Sometimes are not as easy come by. So I'm not professional, but I have the tendencies of someone who is pro. That's what I'm trying to emulate. And these tendencies are someone who has ultimate focus and straight, narrow focus, right? When you split your focus is when everything dilutes. The focus, the return, the output, and the outcome breaks down. But having a single focus and you wake up in the day and you think to yourself, how can I improve this? How can I improve my podcast? How can I improve my business? How can I improve this particular element that I'm trying to go professional on? That is how you turn pro. You don't turn pro by just talking loads of shit and splitting your focus. Treat your field like an athlete, okay? I wake up in the morning, I train. If I don't train, I work. on the podcast, and I keep growing it, right? My agency, as I said, supports the podcast supports the agency. So by working on the agency and trying to improve other people's shows and turning this knob and turning that knob and turning this dial, I can in tune put that time into my podcast too, because I've learned that skill to put it into it. So they work very much side by side. So as the agency has grown, so has the podcast, as a result. And I think waking up with that principle that you're all in, committed, okay? And if people, I think people, if you feel like that you can't commit to something because you're afraid it's going to fail, or if you do commit, then it's going to fail, then it's 100% going to fail before you commit, right? Fair enough, this podcast might not be like huge. I of course want it to be huge, and I want it to help a lot of people. I want it to be at the front of people who are trying to build online businesses or make that change or build something or help someone, right? Or just build something for themselves. And by committing to the process, you will do this at a higher level. If you keep trying to think like, oh, like I don't want to commit fully, then as a result, it's not going to work, right? There has to come that inflection point whereby you put the time in, you validate the idea, and you need to, in tune, go professional, right? So I think it's more of the attitude towards it. As Marcus Hustle would say, it's a thought in the shower. It's when you're in the shower and you're washing your hair and you're thinking to yourself, this should be the only thought in your head at the moment. How do I improve it? How do I make it better? How do I create a better community? How do I create a better podcast? That's the only thought that goes through your head. How do I create better clips or write better copy, right? Because when you have a singularity focus, and having that singular focus is so valuable, then it actually opens up your world into all the stuff you actually need to do. So if I was to think of, let's say, my business, for instance, and having a singularity focus on it, I think like, okay, I need to do more outbound messages. I need to follow up on potential leads. I need to close more deals. I need to close up the operations. I need to tighten up the operations. I need to make sure my fulfillment is on point. I need to make sure that customer service and client services are fulfilled. I need to make sure that our branding and our sales is aligned. And when it all feeds back to one central message, that's when you treat yourself as a professional. And I think it's about having the respect as well of your own self. Like I have a very high self-worth in that regard. Like I don't drink alcohol anymore. I've taken breaks from that. I have videos about this because I think that for someone like myself who's not the most educated or not the most intelligent or not the most articulate, that to be at that really high capacity, almost optimized level of engagement, I need to be way more committed than the average person. When I meet even people in Bali, I meet some very intelligent people that are very, very, it's kind of like anything that they would touch would turn to gold to some degree. Yeah, and it's like, if you were to just touch anything, it would work. Whereas for me, that's not the case. I've failed the e-commerce store, failed the fucking courses, failed fucking coaching business to some degree, wasn't able to scale it. Those things mean to me that I need to be very committed to one thing. And when I have that commitment, after a few years, branch out and do some other stuff at that point. So, some questions about Asia here, which is kind of cool. Is 18 too young to move to Bali if you have an online income? I actually don't think so at all. I think coming to somewhere like Bali or Thailand or Phuket or Koh Samui or even the Philippines puts you in a different mindset towards what you want to do in the first place, right? If you're building online, I don't even think you need that much money. So I'm staying in like a fucking super bougie villa that's like $70 a night, which is like $2,000 a month. But if I wanted to go cheap as balls, which I recommend everyone doing in the first couple of years, is I would do a guest house for $20 a month. And I think I was in a guest house recently and I could download a 1 hour podcast in 7 minutes. And I was like, okay, fuck, like this is pretty sweet. I have a desk here, I have a room here, I have cheap restaurants, healthy restaurants, I have cheap gyms. Like you can go to bougie gyms and spend $250 a month, or you can go to gyms for $11 a month. You can go to restaurants and blow $50 on a steak, or you can go to restaurants and get chicken, rice, and veg for $3. The choice is yours, okay? Choice is yours in a lot of things in life. But I think being out on your own is really good, especially if you come from someone like Ireland, which is quite close-minded, which is quite against the whole, anti-system approach. They're very systematized in what they do. Being in Asia on your own is very valuable. Even with your partner, obviously, like I've grown a lot personally, even though I'm with a girlfriend. It leads to a lot of value as a result, and you'll be able to find things about your business and turn this knob and chat to someone. I got a conversation with a guy yesterday, and even when I spoke to another person, differently last week, we were talking about bank accounts, and he was like, yeah, you can open a bank account in Dubai, and you spend only a couple of months here, and it's really valuable. And I just met him on the street, and he was like, yeah, this is how you do it. And he gave me all this free value that would have cost me $5,000 from an accountant, bear in mind. And he's like, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I was just in the car park going to my motorbike, and I learned all this stuff about opening up global bank accounts, getting access to Stripe, which I don't have access to because my company's based offshore. And as a result, I don't have access to Stripe, which is a fucking pain. And I guess all that was kind of valuable, right? Because you're in this space and you're around other people who are like entrepreneurs and founders and ambitious dudes. And it's really good. You can be on the flip side of it, and you can be looking to fucking date, looking to take it easy. And yeah, you're going to find any girl you want as well on beaches, on beach clubs. You can go out. You can have a lot of adventures that way too. So you got a nice bit of a value there, proposition. So how do you get a visa for Asian countries? Is it hard? Is it worth it? So how I describe this is the process is made complicated by people who are generally unorganized to begin with. The process is very simple. You work with an agency. You say that you want to, build a business. You want to set up an organization here, set up a company in whatever country you want. And there'll be many different agencies that will facilitate that. They will help you to get set up as a founder. They'll give you the right permissions, the right bank accounts, all that kind of good stuff. And it's definitely worth it. I think mine was like in the range of like $2,000 or $3,000, which actually isn't bad at all. And you work with someone who's a professional. And I often say this to Elise, who's looking across from me, is that, you pay people because they're specialized in it. They can do it faster, better, easier than you can. Yeah, you can go through all these company documents and whatever, and country documents and all this regulation. But why? There is an agency that does that, okay? It's like in the e-commerce world, there's loads of ad agencies. If you don't know how to run ads, you can pay an agency to run your ads. And everyone's like, well, yeah, but what about the money that I pay on it? It's like, dude, you're moving to Bali or moving to Thailand. You're going to be building something that's your own. You're going to make that money back in elsewhere. You can reduce your expenses. You can increase your revenue, okay? There's two different ways to look at that. You can reduce your expenses, which is really important in the beginning, and open your mind up to increasing more income in other ways. What advice would you have for your younger self? Ooh, good question. So I worked in an investment bank in London, which you may not think from the fucking slick back hair and 4XL t-shirt. When I was quite young, I was like 21. And I met this mentor of mine who I should really reconnect with, called Neelan Ladva. And he said to me this one thing, which I'll always remember. And he said, the money you make for yourself will mean more than anything you'll ever make for someone else. And that really stuck with me because I was in this career fucking whirlpool at the time thinking, I'll just make more money in my career. I'll get promoted 4 years from now. It'll be great. And at the time, I already had a vehicle. I was already building something, and I had a vehicle that could have been scaled, or I could have, had a couple of failures and setbacks, but I could have kept at it. And I never really took his advice until it was kind of too late, until I had to make the big commitments to bigger companies and kind of sold my fucking life away in some regards sometimes. And that became a bit painful, I guess, to reflect on, because you know it's the right thing to do. You know it's the thing you should be doing and the thing that will bring you more enjoyment, but you don't do it. And why don't you do it? I think it's probably rooted in ego, to some degree, confidence, insecurities. And I think it could be rooted as well in like generational conditioning. So your parents' perspective, your parents' perspective, your town's perspective, your country's perspective, and that can kind of condition you. And that's not an excuse, just conditioning to think that, why would you do that? You can do this. Why would you go here? You can go this. Why would you live in Asia? You can live here. Why would you do this? And that conditioning can be very damaging sometimes, and it can hurt. So I think that you need to trust yourself. I would have trusted myself a lot earlier. I don't say I regret much things, but I think that I could have definitely backed myself earlier, and I could have definitely gone a little bit all in, I guess, a bit earlier. And I think that has given me a lot of lessons in life. And it just means that if I have an intuition, if I think that my business should go in a particular way, or if I think that I should, maybe work on something, that's not shiny object syndrome, just that if I do think that, the next wave of podcasting is this way, and if I commit to it, then yeah, I should do those things. I shouldn't sit on the fence. I should look at logically, look at the data, look at it from a logical perspective, and then trust my intuition. just like we said, you shouldn't leave your job when you're making zero money online. I had got to a point whereby the data had told me it was a good idea, and then I had to jump off the fucking ledge and then just swam in the water and just splashed about the place until I knew that it would somehow work. And I think that principle will become very valuable to you and your organization, you and your business, you and your lifestyle, and that's what you should try to emulate. All right, what else have we got in here? How do you deal with drugs and the benefits and the dangers? I mean, it's like drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. I think, to be honest, like that, it's something that people should be very mindful of. And I think a lot of my kind of advice on this, especially on the alcohol side, is don't make your college habits your lifestyle habits, right? So if you have a college habit, which is getting up late, going out drinking, taking drugs, smoking weed, doing all that kind of stuff, all that kind of dumb shit, don't make that college habit your life habit, because there will come a time when college is over, the fun is over, you won't have that, oh, he's young and dumb anything anymore, and you'll have to enter the real world. For a lot of people to enter the real world quite younger, but if you're going through that phase where you're in your party phase, just remember you need to have the tools in your toolbox to cut this down and reduce it. Because if you're someone who's quite ambitious, and I know people personally, man, that some stuff has ruined their fucking brains, has turned them into sweet potatoes, some people mashed potatoes, some people French fries, and they just turned into fucking potatoes from the system. And I'm saying that in a way that people had advised them, people like told them that there was other options, and they just leaned too much into it, right? You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have everything, right? You can try have a more balanced perspective, but a more balanced perspective, man, is going out every 3 weeks. It's going to DC-10 once a year. It's going to fucking, Santorini and going out clubbing or whatever it is, fucking once a year. You can't have it all. And if you're based in London, Manchester, Dublin, you have Wares Project, you have fucking Fabric, you have like all the best clubs around in those areas. And it's so easy to get caught in that loop because it's a constant loop, right? If Marco Carola is playing a fucking music on in, I don't know, Manchester randomly on a Friday, well then you know that Kiki's playing at some fucking techno event on Saturday, and you have this constant distraction, but like exposure to so much different stuff. So you need to be very disciplined in that, because you can get into a constant cycle. And I remember when I was at peak party stage, what peak party stage is having responsibilities, not taking them, and favoring the session instead. So when I was in my first year out of college, and I was in Dublin before the lockdown happened, man, I would go out on a Thursday, and me and the lads would be out on a Thursday, come back at like 4 a.m. I would be up at 7 into the office for 9. Then I would be at the gym, so I'd be wrecked, super heart rate fucked, all over the place, super hungover. I'd be in the gym at like 6 trying to get a workout in. Then it's Friday night, and then there's like some girl from Tinder who I'm like messaging, that I message in, like, Lisa's like looking at me now at this stage. She's like looking to go for like drinks, and then you go out on drinks, and then you meet your friends afterwards, and then you are in another club on Friday night. And then you're up again on Saturday, and you promise yourself you're not going to go out, whatever, and your other friends get on to you that there's another event going out. So now it's been Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and that stuff used to happen all the time. And sometimes it's just like a few beers, sometimes it's way more extreme, but you need to just draw the line and see like what it is. So how to handle that, I gave someone advice on this the other day, was get a really big goal. So when I was quite young, I competed at 21 years old, and I set a very massive goal that I wanted to compete at a national level. I went and did it, took 8 weeks off alcohol, and it was perfect. It was great, because I don't have that, right? Opportunity cost. Do the exact same. If you want to get a first class honors in your degree, if you want to get your business to 10K, if you want to get a big personal goal, set that goal. And when you set that goal, then you will not feel the FOMO from working towards that goal, which becomes very, very valuable. Okay, so some other stuff. What tasks must you do to make any sort of failure or mediocrity unreasonable? And that question means like, what must you do to be like, okay, this is kind of enough is enough. I would just say my main thing is if you don't see a financial reward. So if you are doing something that really sucks, okay, so you're working on a career that you're making 2K a month or 3K a month or 4K a month, and you're working like a dog, like something to allude to is that when I was working this 6-figure tech job, I was making, like decent money, right? But I was working weekends. I was working at 5 a.m. I was working at 1 a.m. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. And I was on a fixed salary that couldn't be adjusted. And I just thought to myself, I was like, what is going on here? The business is growing, everything is growing, life is growing, but I'm not making more money. I was like, what's going on? So if the vehicle you're in is not scalable from that perspective, so let's say, I don't know what it is, you're like an accountant or something and you can't, your salary is super capped and you have to do all these exams, and at the end of your exams you're going to be 28 making 60K a year. That is not a good vehicle. I'm sorry, right? Unless you want to do accounting, that's not a good vehicle. I think it's kind of funny when people said it to me. They're like, well, when I finish my exams and when I do this, I can make 60K a year. It's like, bro, you can spend 7 years learning these exams and then you're making 60K a year. You could get to 60K within a year by building your own thing or working in a better job. So if you don't want to be this fucking entrepreneur, fucking bro, you can just work a better job and get to that stage faster. So pick that right vehicle. You know, if you're young, ambitious, lots of senior people will take you under the wing. My first ever startup job I got from messaging the guy for saying that I'll work for free. I messaged him on LinkedIn and I said to him, hey, I really want to work in this space. I don't want to work in this I don't want to go through college. It's fucking bullshit. Can I work this during the day and do my college at night? He said, yeah, chill, come in. He paid me 30K a year because I was ambitious. I asked to do it for free. He said, come in. And I just did it and I got paid. And I was working, I was living at home at the time. I was in final year college and I was making 30K a year, which I don't even know how much it is a month, right? And as a result, he just saw someone who was just super fucking hungry. And that hunger, that drive, I'm afraid to say that you kind of be kind of born with it to some degree. But if you find a vehicle that you know that can grow, you will also become hungry. And that's kind of the idea. Best allocation of capital investment in the podcast. Working with the agency. No, I'm joking. So, the thing about this is that a lot of podcasters, you know, this is just like a side hustle for them, which is fine, which is how I started, how I'm still, to some degree, mine is still like an indie podcast. You need to put your time into something that gets max returns, right? So you're going to have standard overheads like your hosting platform, your streaming platform that are like $50 a month, right? But if you know that you can increase your subscribers by 50 subscribers a month or 100 subscribers a month by short form content, then fucking do it. Get a really good editor or work even with someone like myself who creates a shitload of short form and then pump the shit out of it, because it's kind of a snowball effect. If you can get 100 subscribers with a small profile per month, then you'll get 200 a month, 300 a month, 400 a month, and it can just grow and grow and grow and grow. So now you have all these subscribers who all are super warm to you. They're all in short form dopamine mode, but they will transfer over to long form mode. Like, that's how it works. There's short form brain and there's long form brain. That's how this podcast game is set up, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you can, record everything in person, because that company will give you, or the studio will give you the raw files, and that will create so much content for you. If you have a 1 hour episode, you can speak as the authority, get your position across, get your vibes across, get your values and chords and principles and all that shit. You can get the guest core principles, values and stuff, and then chop it into short form. The long form is much more personal and engaging, and as a result, it all will come together, right? So I think if you're in a city like London, I don't know, maybe Dublin, New York, California, Austin, Bali, Thailand, record with people that are there. Like, I was speaking with someone yesterday and I was like, yeah, if you can just, like, you know, let me know who else is on this island. I'll DM them and I'll send them a nice message and I'll be very, like, forthcoming and try to get them on the show. But that's exactly how I'd invest my time, or invest my capital. And, like, for context, my podcast alone probably spend around $2,000 a month, which might seem like a lot, but is it really though? Because the ROI for me is, building a community, building a value, all that kind of good stuff, connecting with people, getting a good network, getting a good guest, building a network, and of course, building an agency. So I'm not really that fussed about it. And I think some things that kind of like a little bit pain me, I guess, in a small way, is when people say, well, I'm not making money from the podcast and therefore I can't invest in the podcast. It's like, dude, all startups don't make money for like 10 fucking years. A SaaS company doesn't make money for the first like 2 years. So why do you expect to make money and then allocate that money? I don't understand why that's the expectation. The money that you're putting into it has a different ROI. Like the indirect is the network. So let me give you an example. If you produce a load of great video content, a load of great in-person studio content, and it costs you a few $100s a month, right? If you do that, you can get the new guests because they see that you've committed to it personally, emotionally, physically, and financially. And because of that, it's more of this professional setup, which I really like. And even some of the clients I work with, they want to put the time into it. They want to put the money behind it because it looks better and it has a better feel, and a better vibe. What's one thing you would have changed your mind about recently in the podcast world? Ooh, that's a good question. One thing I've changed my mind about in the podcast world. I actually heard this from Chris Williamson and I completely agree. He said it on Mike Thurston's podcast that all of podcasting can be down to guests. And I agree. I really agree. Because I used to think that it was down to education. And I used to think that if I put out this really good educational content, if I spoke to a C-level, C-suite executive guest who had climbed his career and done all this great stuff, that's what would grow the podcast. But it's actually not. It's the quality of the guest and the audience of the guest that usually helps. And that doesn't mean that everything is this fucking status kind of game, but it's kind of like how warm that audience is. So I'll give you an example. TM Cycle's Thomas Maw. He has around 40,000 followers, I think it is, and around 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. And they are die-hard followers. They listen to all his stuff. They listen to his story. They listen to all the stuff he came out from, like his PEDs experience and when he transitioned into High Rocks and transitioned back to bodybuilding. They were there with him. They listened to him. They valued him. Therefore, when I recorded with TM Cycles, which has been twice, those episodes just pop off, straight off the shelf. And I used to think, I was like, oh, it's to do with the content, it's to do with this, to do with this. No. It's to do with the affiliation of the community to the individual. And that's what's very important. So as Kickoff Sessions is growing, that's something that I'm trying to really get to the bottom of too and really include is having those value systems, which is very valuable. Okay, that's kind of it. So that's just wrapping up. Hopefully you enjoyed this. A bit different, a little bit of a personal, I guess, journey from what's happened behind the scenes over the last couple of years. If you do enjoy the session, I want to say thank you for listening. It's been over an hour. If you can just subscribe on YouTube, like it, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify so I can pay my rent this year. That would be really great. And I'll see you in the next session. So I have a lot of sessions coming out this month that are going to be based in Bali. Some are based in remote that I've kind of backed up. So really appreciate you listening. If you do, please again, like all that kind of good stuff. And I will see you in the next session. Thank you for listening.